Hey everyone, this is Chris Miller and you're listening to the EduMind podcast. If you're an architect, project manager, or a nurse, or maybe you're just curious about these career paths, then our podcast is one that you're not going to want to miss. Each week, we'll be talking to subject matter experts, course instructors, and other special guests to bring you the latest and greatest in architecture, project management, and nursing, and a whole lot more. Now, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the EduMind's weekly podcast. Today, we have a special guest here. We have Miss Jeanie Fan. So we're going to go ahead and get rolling and start with her, and we'll let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast. So, Jeanie, thank you very much for joining us today. If you could just, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get rolling.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is very exciting. Good to be able to help other, emerging architects or candidates who's thinking about becoming architects. So I'm an architect, all my education in architecture, undergrad and graduate school, and I'm currently working in New York. I've been doing this for a really long time, and coming up like 18 years, and registered in the state of New York. I'm working with a boutique firm in Brooklyn, and we're doing this office is more kind of interior, just the nature of the project in New York. There's a lot more interior kind of architecture we're doing. And I also practiced quite a long time in California, between undergrad and grad. So
very nice. You went from one coast to the other.
Yes, and also stopped in the middle in Texas.
Oh, wow. Okay. So actually quite different geographic regions you've been in, a lot of different architecture in all three of those regions. I'm from California. I live in Ohio. Where in California were you at?
Grew up in Southern California, went to school at Berkeley. So
went from south to north. All right.
Yeah.
I grew up in Lompoc, right outside of Santa Barbara, about an hour north. So where in Southern California are you?
At the San Gabriel Valley. That's where family is.
Very nice. Very nice. I was just in Southern California a week ago. It was nice. Question though. So you being from Southern California, you gotta be an In-N-Out Burger fan, right?
Oh yes, actually I do.
And I think in New York, their big one is, what is it? The Shake Shack?
Yeah, the Shake Shack.
So you've had both, I'm assuming, right? In-N-Out and Shake Shack. And which one do you still prefer?
In-N-Out.
Oh, yes.
Is that a correct answer?
Absolutely. I have not been impressed with Shake Shack, but I don't want to offend any Shake Shackers out there. It's a good burger, but In-N-Out's tough to beat for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Something about it is very good.
It's funny is my brother lives out in Redlands and in the Inland Empire, and I was driving by an In-N-Out. I think it was 8:00 on a Friday night. It must have been 100 cars deep in the drive-thru. That place is packed.
Yeah.
I got a last fun question for you before we dive into things today. So, you being from Southern California, now living in New York. So I got to ask, Dodgers or Yankees?
Okay, sorry, I'm not very sports.
That's a safe answer, so I can respect that answer there. So very good. But New York got a lot of great architecture. I was there actually last week. I was in New York, and it's always a great place to visit. A lot of good food. So very exciting to see that you went from west to east. Very nice. Yeah,
it's very exciting to see different codes of operation. It does seem like there's a cultural difference. I guess
agree.
The weather, here we're tied to the weather a lot doing construction. Where in sunny California, you just keep going every day.
Every day is a work day, basically.
Every day is a work day.
So you bring up an interesting topic. I know it's not the topic of conversation today, but weather it seems to play a big role in not just architecture, but also in engineering. So what are some of the things you've noticed, like, big differences in how weather affects what you do on a daily basis from East Coast to West Coast?
Well, of course, when start break ground, definitely here, have to like spring the, ground is thaw and all that, or before it start to freeze. Secondly, in terms of the style and the West Coast, or actually a lot of the architecture magazine kind of populate these days, that whole indoor-outdoor flow.
Mm-hmm.
People love that. But to be honestly, in the East Coast with the snow buildup and there's weather here, it's just not meant for that kind of weather. The people have to think really carefully about this, or you have to invest in the waterproofing, drains, and plan it out. And it's a little bit more, if you want that inside outside flow of kind of architecture experience, it's more than just what you saw on magazine and kind of trying to do the same thing here.
That makes sense. So, I been doing engineer prep and PMP exam prep for years, and so I'm excited to talk to you about ARE exam prep. It's a little bit of a different channel for me, so I'm kind of excited. I also saw that you were going to talk to us a little bit about the reverse approach to studying for the ARE exam. So I'm excited to hear about that. As I mentioned, I've been, teaching the PMP, and, you kind of get used to a certain flow or a certain style when it comes to exam prep. So when I saw this reverse approach, I was like, this sounds interesting. So, can you tell me a little bit about your reverse approach to preparing for the ARE exam?
Sure. So for me, what I call reverse approach is I never really sit down and crack open a book or the study guide and start from reading from chapter 1 and then get ready and then take the practice exam. I jump straight through the practice exams and work on those questions and not penalize myself for getting them wrong, but just going through them. And I will stop if a subject I did not know and then go back to the textbook or study guide and study it that way. So because that one kind of helped you, because in the architecture exam, there's like 6 divisions. There's so much stuff you want to cover. It's a little too much, also very daunting. It's like, oh my God, I have to read like 200 pages before I know I'm ready. No, just go in there and start the practice exam and then see if the ones that you pass, you got it right, then you're like, okay, that I can move on. Let me move into the next subject, next question, what I don't know. And to study that way, I felt a little bit more manageable instead of being so daunting to just like, where do I even start? Which section should I start with? So I think that's kind of my little trick called reverse approach.
I like it. It's interesting. Again, when I talk to engineers or project managers, I always tell them, hey, take a practice test to at least form a baseline to kind of see where you stand. But what you're doing is interesting. It's more or less like this is going to be your strategy for making it through, as opposed to saying, okay, all right, let's say you have a practice test after chapter 4. So let's say chapters 1 through 4 are like 400 pages. You're right. That's daunting. I mean, you're like, holy cow, I got to get through 400 pages to see if I even know anything. So your approach is a little bit different than forming a baseline. I like it. It makes sense too. It not only does it give you maybe more manageable, confidence, but also more manageable pieces. But you're right. It all comes down to confidence. You're like, I understand this material, so you can move on to the next material. And then you can always go back to refresh. But I like it. That's an interesting approach, and I think it's very clever. Thank you for sharing that with the audience here today. So when it comes to taking exams, it's not always boils down to, what you know. It's also how well you manage time, how well you're an exam or a test taker. But a lot of people, I think, maybe make the mistake or have the wrong idea about let's just memorize everything. And memorization's good, but, let's say you go in for a 6-hour exam and things aren't going according to plan, because sometimes they don't go according to plan. You start to panic, and when you panic, memorization kind of goes out the window. But if you actually knew the information and retain that information, I think you're in a lot better shape. So when it comes to the whole concept or idea of content retention, can you kind of give us maybe some of your best 5 tips on how to improve content retention? How can people become better at retaining information?
Well, I think in terms of architecture it actually applies in some of the thing every day when you're going to work. So I think context makes it a huge difference. So, architecture also, you have to do the IDP, the internship program. So that does help you on your exams. So if you're trying to take the exam fresh out of school, maybe it's just a little, even little, some of the stuff will be very fresh to you, but without context and how it's applied, working will give you that context to help you understand it better. And I think when you're taking the exam, actually, I don't know if I have 5 tips, but imagine you are at the office. And now the question that I have seen some, end card come out there, the question is phrased in a way that's like a case study.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it in real world, how would this be done? And that will help you understand the question. And then it's actually pretty logical. It's not like a specific memorization, not like, oh, remember ADA, some stuff like, oh, ADA hallway or passageway have to at least 36-inch wide. So that one you kind of know. Mm-hmm. But again, when you're working, you come across those information. It sticks to you a little bit more.
That makes sense. Absolutely. And, again, getting back to the whole memorization versus application, like I said, memorization is great, but when things kind of go awry, you're in a lot of trouble. But if you can visualize how things apply, you're in a lot better shape. So like what you're saying is when it comes to these case studies, if you can kind of just, as you're reading it, say, okay, this is how I would apply it for, my daily work, it's a lot easier for you to kind of calm yourself down and approach that question. So no, that's great. So let's talk about active reading and how does it affect reading comprehension? Can you dive into that a little bit?
Well, I think that's kind of ties to back my strategy of reverse studying. So even like some of the question I got right, but then you have to have multiple choices. And I see one of the answer is something that I'm not familiar with, then I go back to the reference guide or the study guide. And so indexes are your best friend. Studying, just look it up, kind of skip to it where you need to know, where do you need to go in the big textbook. I mean, look at this is your, the B book. These are all your construction. This is
wow.
There's a lot to go through. And MEP book, and this is the construction book, and
holy cow, those are big and daunting. So
yeah, and it's too much. So. Table of contents is also great. Narrow down to area you want to study. I think that's a part of the approach.
No, I like it. It makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you this, and you've probably seen this, or maybe if you actually done it when you were preparing to take the exam is, everyone has great intentions, right? When they want to, hey, I'm going to take this exam, let's say December 31st. And let's say we're sitting now and it's August 1st. You're like, you know what? It's August 1st. I'm taking the exam. December 31st, I got plenty of time. So you might come up with a study plan and you're like, okay, I'm still 4 months away. Plenty of time. Time goes quickly, as we all know. And next thing you know, it's like October 15th and you're like, holy cow. I'm not anywhere where I'm supposed to be. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, when you're self-studying, accountability is important, right? And so you're the only one that can hold yourself accountable. So what is the best way that you can keep yourself accountable for your studies?
Well, when I was taking the exam, I was in an office where a lot of people were taking an exam. That really helped. Surround yourself. You do. Maybe not specific a study buddy that you have to study together. Actually, you concentrate better when you study by yourself. Mm-hmm. But then you have this slight competition among you and your friends. Kind of like, oh, I passed one. I was like, what about you? Did you pass the next one? So having that small competition among your peers is actually one of the motivations.
I like it. I agree. Competition is always nice. It's healthy. But also you can rely on those people in your group to help you stay accountable. I look at it this way. So let's say you and I are studying together and we're like, all right, Friday, we're going to meet and we're going to go over practice test chapters 1 through 4, right? Uh-huh. So I know that if I don't come Friday when I meet you prepared, I'm going to kind of feel like I'm a little bit behind. So I would do whatever it takes to make sure that I'm well ready for when we meet on Friday. So I like that idea of kind of not, like you said, studying alone is great, but having people that you can either, check in with to take tests with or know that you're on the same schedule, that kind of a group accountability is important. I think it's kind of fun as well. So that's a good tip. So here's the $1 million question, and I don't have an answer for it. So not only when it comes to exam prep, I'm going to say just about every aspect of life this can apply. Procrastination. I've done it. I have an assignment due in a month. Plenty of time. I'll start on it next week. Well, next week never comes, right? All of a sudden it's the night before it's due and I'm like, holy cow, I'm going to spend all night doing this project that I had 29 other nights to work on it. So what kind of advice can you give to, I don't know, maybe keep people from wanting to procrastinate? I don't know if it's human nature, not just what we do, but maybe you can share with the audience some ways to avoid that procrastination.
Oh, yeah, that was a hard one. For the 6 exam, my from beginning to end, I took 2 years. But
Okay.
also, NCARB keeps you on the clock. As soon as you start your first exam, you have 5 years to finish everything. So
Right.
that again already bounds you into. But how do you drag it out between the 5 years to do as quickly as you can? Is usually if you pass one, that gives you the motivation to
Mhm.
kind of like, okay, let's keep going. And again, check in with your groups, with your peers. This is the motivation. Oh, I also want to mention kind of your local AIA
Okay.
chapter
Very
that
good.
they also have study groups. And also nowadays, we're doing everything all virtually. Actually, sometimes just a quick check-in on Zoom with your
Oh,
friend
okay.
is a good one. That's what I heard some of my friends who are taking the exam they're doing. And also because Zoom now, we also get a little bit tired of it. So you do very efficient. Right? And then we all have just the free account of the 40-minute, let's just include it.
That's true.
And yeah, and then when we get all tired of our work Zoom, so you make your 40 minutes very efficient and get through the stuff you guys want to talk about and just keep each other going. So
That's interesting. So I think one of the greatest things is a free Zoom account. And the reason I say that is not just because it's free, but you're right, you're limited to the
yes,
duration. So it forces you. So I remember when, first things started going remote and we had to rely on, whether it's Zoom, sometimes it might have been Skype or
yes,
Teams
yeah,
meetings. And these meetings, they could drag on forever. But whenever I had a meeting with someone that had Zoom, 40 minutes,
yes,
done. And I
yeah,
was like, man, this is a great thing. So I think you're right. Setting these deadlines, the rolling clock that NCARB has is great. But what I've told people, and then I'll ask you if this maybe applies for the ARE as well, is let's say you want to take the construction and evaluation division exam. Before you, I mean, like as soon as you know that, hey, I'm going to start preparing for this exam, set your exam date. That way, you know that you're up against at least a particular end date, and then you're forced to at least kind of stay within that plan to take the exam. I also tell students the worst thing they can do is change their exam date.
mhm,
Unless if the sky is falling, I tell them don't change your exam date because what that's going to allow you to do, it's going to allow you to procrastinate.
yeah,
Sure, it costs you money to change your exam date, but some people, they weigh the odds and or the pros and cons are like, okay, maybe it's X dollars to move the exam, but it allows me to drag it out a little bit more. So I tell them, do not change your exam date. So it's kind of like the rolling clock in a sense, except you're setting your own clock because if you want to take your construction evaluation exam on December 31st, don't move it and then work your way backwards. And kind of like with your whole reverse approach, it applies. But I think procrastination is inevitable. I think it's in all of us, and we do it
yeah,
for
yeah,
everything. But it's just, I think what you're saying is right. Set up a clock and stick to it. So I think that's probably the best answer that we're going to come up with, because if we could come up with an answer on how to eliminate procrastination, I think we're going to be wanted by a lot of people. So
yes, yeah, we
um,
can, yeah.
so I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you go ahead and respond. When it comes to studying, there's a lot of materials out there. There's review courses. We offer a review course. There's books out there. There's practice tests. There's, flashcards. There's so many different resources available. What would you tell someone that says, hey, Jeanie, I'm going to take one of the division exams in a couple of months. How should I prioritize my study? And what would you answer for that? Or what advice would you give?
For the ARE, I say the practice management and also the project management. I think those should start first. And also, if you just finished school or you're listening while you're still in school, there is a professional practice course that all the accredited school need to take. Keep all the material from that course. As they talk to you about all the AIA contracts, the professor will give you a little reader on all the case study, all the legal issues. So take that course seriously. Everybody always thought that usually the last semester I have to check that off on their requirement list, and keep all that material because you will use that to study. And take the 2 section of the exam on practice on the management first, because all the kind of legal issue trickles down to all the other portion as well. So then you can study building system materials, all that. But all the legalities, all the kind of code stuff, practice management, that's kind of to start to get your basis. So that's how I would start the study and approach. And yes, keep all your doing course and you marked up all the AIA contract, all your notes. That will come very handy. And it will not feel so daunting. Again, it's like, oh my God, another 20-page AI contract to read again and remember what it's talking about. You already had it. You already have all your notes.
That's some great advice. So, a lot of times people, I guess we're creatures of habit, right? We find something we like and we tend to stick with it. Like, for instance, if you can go back and remember when you were in grade school, a lot of teachers would assign you seating, right? You come to social studies, you sit here every single day. And then you get into college and there is no seating charts in college, right? You sit wherever you want. But I remember every day going to the same class, Economics 101, I sat in the same chair every day, even though I didn't have to. So creature of habit. So when it comes to studying for an exam, are you better off studying in the same location every single day, or should you mix it up from time to time?
I have heard both. For me, I call myself the nomad. I carry my backpack, all my materials in there, and now you can have your iPad or whatnot. Put in headphones that you can listen to music or some of the lectures on the subject. You can find it. People have those out there. And I just walk around the city. Then also don't feel like I lost the fun of experiencing New York while I'm studying at home. So I go to the park a little bit, sit on the bench, read, and then I picked up, I was like, okay, I need some food, and I go to a cafe, hang out there for a little bit. So that's how I got through all my study. On the other hand, I have friends who every week on the weekend, there's a spot on a local cafe or like a diner that he goes, and then that's how he needed to study. He gave himself 4 hours every day on weekends, both Saturday and Sunday at the diner. And in the morning, get it done. And then in the afternoon, he can do whatever he wants. So he needed that kind of specific spot for him to feel like he can concentrate. For me, I needed the kind of extra distraction to keep me motivated so I don't feel like I'm trapped. So kind of experience on your own which one that works best for you.
It makes sense. Like for me, sometimes I'm thinking if I stay home and study on weekends, you get bored eventually, right?
Yeah.
The diner, maybe he liked the food and he had to go back every weekend. But for you, it's interesting. And, you kind of explore the city while you're studying. And that way, because sometimes when you're staring at materials, whether they're books or practice tests or listening to lecture videos, if you listen to them or read them long enough, they just you start to kind of tune them out. But for you, being the nomad style, maybe you spend 4 hours at Central Park and then you're like, okay, maybe now it's time to go walk Fifth Avenue. So
yes, exactly.
I like that approach. But you're right. I think it's, you have to kind of discover it on your own, whether or not you're a creature of habit or you're more like you, where you throw everything in a backpack and you trek across the Big Apple. So thank you for sharing that. Earlier you mentioned that, when you're in that course, you highlight contracts and you mark them up. And so you want to save them. So how efficient is highlighting itself? Did you find yourself highlighting a bunch of stuff as you were studying for the ARE?
I actually do notes. I like scribble little words along the side that will try to trigger my memory. And also when I was studying, I had hand-me-down material for me. And that was like 4 different color highlighted already. So it wasn't very useful. For me, I like the act of just drawing a line on the side of a paragraph and having a simple couple words that actually triggers my memory of what I read here or keywords for this paragraph or what I understand about this paragraph for a couple of lines. Instead of highlighting, you kind of like still have to go back and read it. But that short note, just sometimes even just a smiley face, just like, okay, I like this. This is a good point. And then that's a very useful, I find it.
I love that approach because, sometimes one, like you said, you get these hand-me-down materials, right?
Yes,
you don't know if you highlighted it or if they already came highlighted. So you don't know. And then also sometimes I'll highlight stuff and I'll come back and be like, why did I highlight this for? But if you wrote a note or some kind of a symbol or something, it would, trigger that in your memory. So no, that's a great approach. I'm going to probably steal that for some of my exam tips that I give for these other exams. So thank you for that. as I mentioned a little bit ago, there's many materials out there, whether you have notes, lecture videos, books, practice tests. How valuable, and maybe in your journey, how valuable did you find practice tests?
Very valuable, because that's my study guide. Because I'm using that as the basis to what information do I need to know, and branch off from that. So yes, I highly value and then do them, and don't, when you get something wrong, just don't punish yourself. You just like, this is still a learning experience. I'm learning. It's okay that I don't know. I think sometimes, most of the time, people, when give themselves a practice test, they get very freaked out. It's like, oh my God, I didn't pass, or like, no, that doesn't mean you. That's why you're studying.
I agree.
Don't punish yourself. Yeah.
Especially when you're using it the way you do it. You're going backwards with it, right? So you're actually using it as more of a, I don't know, like a positive reinforcement tool versus like, okay, I read chapter 1, I'm taking the practice test on chapter 1 and I bombed chapter 1. I'm like, wait a second, I just read chapter 1 and I didn't do well. So then you kind of get down in the dumps a little bit, because you're thinking, holy cow, I didn't grasp any of this material. So I like how you kind of pair the practice exam with positive reinforcement. I agree. I think practice exams are invaluable. I think they're a great resource. They're a good measuring stick of, how well you're going to do on the exam. But also, I think there's some maybe false pitfalls that you can fall into as well, because sometimes you can become overconfident. So one thing I like to do is when I tell people, take a practice test, I tell them to mark their confidence level, high, medium, and low. Because sometimes when you take a practice test, you might have guessed on every single question and you got them all right. So you're thinking, I know all this, but let's say I guess on 50 questions out of 100. If I mark them as low confident level, then it triggers in my mind that, oh man, I really just guessed. So, that way I know that maybe I need to go back and review this. But I think your approach on practice exam is great, because you're right. Sometimes people see these practice exams as a make or break. And when they don't do well, they kind of just get kind of down in the dumps, but then that affects how you prepare for the exam. You have a negative outlook. But if you're pairing it with a learning tool, as you said, I think that's a great approach. So thank you for sharing that. Preparing for an exam is a lot of work. There's a lot of strategy that's involved, but also I think coming up with a strategy for the exam day itself is also important. Do you have any pointers that you can throw out there to the audience about what kind of tips or strategy you want for exam day?
Actually, I schedule my exam day after I start study a little bit, and I feel like, okay, I think I can manage this. How much longer do I need? And then I book my exam day. And on the day of, do get a good night of sleep. Don't stress out too much. Don't try to cram it at night. Just at that point, you will not get any more. You'll just only stress yourself even more.
I agree.
You should stop almost 24 hours before. Just kind of let it sink in, and a good night's rest. Get up. Make sure you have some food, because some of the section portion is 4-6 hours long. You'll be there for a while. Make sure always bring a jacket with you, a light cardigan, because it's always cold in there. Or maybe you start to stress out and you feel cold and chill. That's the most uncomfortable feeling you can have. So because it is a test center and they always turn on the AC for the computer and all that stuff. So that's actually very important, because I have been in there once. I was like, toward the end, I was like, I feel very uncomfortable. I'm really cold. So having a little jacket, a cardigan, just a pullover, and also makes you feel like you're somewhat in control. You're in comfort. You can continue. Otherwise, that's a slight discomfort. It just kind of really throws you off.
No, and also I think, when you're cold, that's what you're focusing on. And you're not focusing on the questions themselves. No, those are some great tips. I agree with you. I think that cramming the night before is a horrible thing, because you're not going to absorb anything new. So what I usually tell students is, what? That last night, just relax, watch a funny movie, and get some good night's sleep is very important. Maybe do some light review a couple of days before the exam, but cramming, I think, is a horrible approach for the exam, in the sense that you're not going to retain it. So no, that's some great advice. I think I like your idea of, if you're bring a jacket. You're kind of controlling the environment, which I think is nice. That way you're not, at the mercy of the environment, which is good. So those are some great tips for people for exam day. It's important knowing what to expect when you walk into that exam hall. You want to make sure, as you said, you have some food for those long days, and a sweater is great. So no, thank you for sharing that. So many things I wanted to talk to you about. And here we are, time's just kind of flying by. So I definitely want to have you back, but also, let's just kind of talk about the ARE in general as you mentioned some great communities that are available for students that are preparing the AIA chapters, study groups in the sense for not maybe studying together, but for accountability, I think was great. Are there any other ARE resources out there that you can think of that you want to share with everybody here today?
I still kind of back to your peers, people who have taken the exam. Back to the test day. Talk to your friends, because the different test centers, they have taken it. They can tell you, kind of give you a little bit kind of tips on the environment, what you need to be aware about. Maybe there's another test center that's actually super hot, so make sure you're able to wear a layer that you can take off. But yes, they cannot tell you about the content of the exam,
right.
but kind of get the feel of it, like kind of like, oh, where have you taken it? They're like, oh, don't go to the other one. It's super dark. I don't like it. So that's, yeah. Again, talk to your peers. I was so lucky when I was taking it. I was among a lot of people who was in the office who was taking it. That is definitely one of the key motivations.
I agree with you. Sometimes it's nice to have people that that are on the same journey as you.
Yeah.
They might not be studying for the same division, but they're still going through the same process and steps that you are in preparing for whichever division that you're taking. So, we started off with some fun, talked about LA, New York, the food, things like that. And then we got into some pretty heavy stuff talking about preparing for the ARE exam. So I just want to kind of let the audience get to know you a little bit better. So I just want to ask you a couple of fun questions that you can share, and we can kind of learn more about you. So at what point did you realize that, hey, architecture is the road for me?
Oh, wow. I actually felt like it chose me instead of me choosing architecture.
Oh,
actually,
interesting.
In the end of, senior year in high school, I was taking all the AP calculus, AP chemistry and all that. But on the same hand, for some weird luck, I was doing a lot of artwork, submitting even LA County Fair. I got a ribbon for whatever drawing submitted. And I did a mural at the school. So it was kind of like a whole left brain, right brain child, whatnot. And it was so, I don't know how the UC system application work these days, but it was just to check off what majors you want. I actually had art was my first choice, and I was like, well, architecture is above it. It's like architecture. And I also applied for civil engineering. So I got into UC Irvine for civil engineering. UCLA, I was waitlisted for design instead of art. I submitted a fine art portfolio to a design school. It was completely inappropriate. And then I got accepted to UC Berkeley for architecture. And when I got in, I was still so sure. I was like, architecture school and the art school building was like right across from each other. I was like, I'm just going to take arts classes in the art building. Even though I got into architecture, I'll get to it later. But as soon as the first semester comes, I start taking classes, and architecture just kind of speak to me in a differently. I didn't realize, actually very philosophical and psychological, and I kind of deal with a lot of social issues that I am very interested about. And then I know so much easier for me to get classes in art because I was accepted to the major.
Right.
So it was just very naturally, I think it found me instead of me kind of growing up like, I'm going to be an architect.
Right.
It happened.
Sometimes that's the best things that can happen. Yeah. That is an interesting journey. I enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing that with us. Here, it's funny, as you said, you're from the San Gabriel Valley down in Southern California, went up to UC Berkeley. How different was it living up in the Berkeley area compared to Southern California?
Well, actually, I don't like to drive. So Northern California is already better. We have some usable, reliable public transit. Well, that's why I moved to East Coast again. That's more reliable. Yeah,
True.
I'm actually not a driver. I terrified of driving. So that's why LA wasn't quite my place.
No, I agree. Public transportation definitely better up in Northern California and the Bay Area, and then of course New York. It's the way of life up
Yeah.
there. So we've heard about your journey or your path to architecture. So now let's say you go to the local high school
Mhm.
and you're there for career day, and a senior in high school walks up to you and says, "Miss Fan, can you give me some advice about pursuing a career in architecture?" What advice could you give that high school senior?
Uh, I would ask them, would they be interesting to be a lifetime learner? This is a profession that you will always be constantly learning new things, and you have to be interested in it and engage in it. And yeah, and also being kind of like a little bit multitasker. You have to know a bit about everything.
Mhm.
Kind of all the other podcasts I saw here, all the engineering stuff. Like, yeah, we actually have to be not to the extent that they need to know how to apply it, like install it and specify it. But as an architect, you have to know a little bit about everything. You kind of have to be just be interested in that and be kind of willing to take in that.
And that is great. That's some great advice. I talk to engineers every day. And, one of the fascinating things about engineering is that every day can be different. There's so many different fields that you can go into, civil, electrical, and all that other fun stuff. And then you have architecture, which, I find interesting in a way that you don't have to be an architect to appreciate it. You have tourists that, go to these places to look at the buildings or bridges. And so I think that's a pretty cool thing about architecture, that you don't have to be, I guess, per se in that field to appreciate it. So, there's so many things in architecture, from buildings to bridges to all different types of designs. What would you say is the biggest thing that surprised you about architecture?
Let's see. I think it is the kind of psychological and philosophical kind of theory behind it. As an architect, if you're coming from that kind of design point of view, sometimes each of us has an agenda, what we're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's purely aesthetic. You just want to make something look good. But then I think in this newer generation of architecture, as the future coming, I think we need to be thinking more holistically and not just with creating a composition or a pretty picture or for your Instagram. It's something that people have to think about the user and how that impacts the user, and how that, for a while, they call it architecture frozen music. No, but architecture is actually frozen politics. How that reflects our value of the future we're living in. What does that mean? And we can get all talking to how the building consumes the most energy, how that impact global warming, what we're facing in our this generation going forward. So that we should, this is a whole different topic we can
Well, we will get into that on another podcast. I'd love to have you back and talk about some of those, I guess, bigger issues or more in depth. I would love to have you back, Jeanie. It's been a fantastic time talking to you. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and you've been a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing your experience, and also so many valuable tips that people can take away from this podcast and apply it for their path to ARE. So, Jeanie, I want to thank you very much for coming out here today and spending some time with me. And for those of you out there, I'll see you in the next episode. Have a great rest of your day.